The biggest takeaway from Auburn's scrimmage on Saturday, the quarterback controversy, it's not going anywhere.
Freezing temperatures are likely for several hours inland and a few hours closer to the coast.
Yahtzee.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Happy Sunday. It's the morning after. Darrell, Dapprich, Montgomery radio vet hanging out with us. Of course, we'll do this every Sunday throughout the season. And Darrell, yesterday we got to somewhat experience Auburn's first scrimmage of fall camp. They closed the media window Friday night due to weather. It was beautiful Saturday morning, and we got some reports, which is good. We got some reports from folks in attendance, but regardless of who you talk to, it sounds like Holden Geriner was exceptional yesterday. And there are some questions as far as, did he do this against the other ones? Or, who exactly he was operating with. But I do know that he got some reps, at least one series with the ones where he drove the ball down the field and they ultimately scored. But just talking to a few folks that got to watch the entire scrimmage, Holden Geriner, clearly the best quarterback on Auburn's roster on Saturday.
That's not – I know that that's going to surprise a lot of people to hear that. But if you go back to last year, and we watched him throw, and people were talking about how the ball comes out of his hand better than anybody else. He can really spin it. And then this year in fall camp, we've heard some things as well. Maybe he was discounted or kind of too much of an afterthought after spring ball prematurely. And I know that, some of his film coming out of high school, he made elite throws. I know Trent Dilfer loved him, the quarterback guru. He puts the ball in tight windows. Now, again, it remains to be seen. We don't know exactly in what formations this came out of and what defenses this was. It the ones, was it the twos? But the fact that he's generating this much buzz is surprising that it's this late in the quarterback battle, and he is. But then again, when you look at some of the attributes and we watched him throw, that's a positive thing, in my opinion. I mean, he's got the ball leaves his hand and it comes out of his hand. From the eyeball test, it's great.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like from start to finish, he was the best quarterback. Sounds like Robby Ashford had the best moment where he left the pocket and threw on the run. And one person I talked to said it was Mardner, but then I talked to two people that said it was Coy Moore. And so take that for what you will. But he threw a touchdown pass on the run, and it was apparently an NFL level, beautiful pass. And that's what Robby Ashford is, right? I mean, you get these moments where it's like, man, just give me those a little bit more often and you would be unstoppable. And then it sounds like he would overthrow folks or underthrow folks, and not that other quarterbacks didn't, but it's just as far as the consistency is kind of what you're wanting from Robby Ashford, because we all know what his upside is, and he showed that. He showed that on Saturday.
That's the thing is if the consistency word, if Robby Ashford can show consistency through fall practice and through fall camp and through the games, then he becomes your clear-cut favorite. And because that's the only thing he had to do to get out of his way. The flashes were elite. The legs are elite. The arm strength when he really lets it go, and how he can improvise, athleticism on the run, his toughness, his warrior mentality, all that elite. It's the consistency and sometimes the simple plays. The mundane, the routine stuff. You get that cleaned up, and we wouldn't have been talking about a quarterback competition. I don't think we would have brought a quarterback in if that
Agreed.
was. And so that's the whole thing. Look, I trust this coaching staff. Okay, I want to preface this by saying people need to understand where you and I come from on this angle of quarterbacks. I want the best possible representative quarterback choice for Auburn to put them in position to win. This narrative that there's somebody we would be rooting for or that we don't like is a joke. And quite frankly, it's insulting. I don't care if it's a Martian named Joe Blow. If he puts Auburn in the best position to win, God bless him, that's who I want. So I trust the coaching staff not Darrell Dapprich, not Zach Blackerby. We're not the coaches. Who I would want, although I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't want anybody. But if I did, it doesn't matter. I'm not a coach. The coaching staff's going to make that decision, and I trust them so much more than what we had last year. And then I also trust them to put who's ever in that position, Holden, Robby, or Payton Thorne, to be better and get coached effectively. And for me, it's a win-win. I don't care name, number, who it is. Just put somebody out there that's going to help Auburn win.
Yeah. And then just to kind of wrap up the 3 quarterbacks, sounds like Payton Thorne left a little bit to be desired on the field yesterday. I was told, I was kind of being texted some play-by-play of what was going on. It sounds like Jyaire dropped a touchdown pass. It was something that would have been a touchdown pass. And then same for Rivaldo Fairweather. And then Hugh Freeze commented on it. He said that they caught it out of bounds. So I don't know if those were separate things, if those were the same things. I'm not exactly sure, but it sounds like they were close, but close doesn't always get you there. And that's something where we're just not privy to being able to actually see the film. So we just kind of got to take it through secondhand sources in some cases. So we'll see exactly what that means. But Darrell, let's try to decipher something, if you don't mind. And we'll jump into more of what Hugh Freeze said later in the show. But the most interesting thing he said to me when he was asked about quarterbacks, because today, Sunday, is the 10th day, and he kind of put out there that he's got 10 days to narrow it from 3 to 2. He was asked about that. And he said, the day before the scrimmage, he was certain he had a good idea of who the 2 were going to be. And then he said after the scrimmage, he's like, I'm not sure anymore. So who do you think that means? Because it sounds like it's pretty much unanimous. Anybody that you talk to was at the scrimmage or involved in the scrimmage, they're all about Holden Geriner was exceptional. Do you think that means he was considering dropping out Holden out of the race, and it would have been a Payton and Robby thing moving forward? Then Holden's play yesterday kind of showed them, hey, I deserve to be in this competition still. Decipher that for me. What do you think Hugh Freeze was actually saying?
Well, before I do that, it's a very important. I'm so glad you mentioned it the way you did. You deciphered it right, and we need to there is this kind of narrative, or I think people really misunderstood what Hugh Freeze said. So I'm glad you clarified that. He was not talking about the starter being named. And some people have jumped on that and assumed that's what he meant and gotten that wrong, that he meant, I had my mind made up of who was going to be our quarterback. Now I have to. No, it wasn't who the quarterback was going to be. It's who he was going to pare it down to the last.
That's what the question was.
That's an important differentiation that some people are getting wrong. And I wanted to clarify that. In my opinion, it means exactly what you said. I think just like we kind of wrote Holden Geriner off after the spring by some of the things we heard, not from our own biases, just from people inside the complex, you didn't hear his name that much after spring. You assumed when Payton Thorne came in, it was a Payton Robby show. That was going to be the battle. We all kind of were guilty of that. I think now Holden Geriner has forced the issue of the coaching staff to say, I'm not ready to pare it down to 2. That's what I take from it. I think we need to leave this open a little bit longer. He's made enough plays. He's turned enough heads. He's forced the coaching staff to not be ready to make a decision to pare it down to 2 with his play in fall camp and the scrimmage. That's what I took from that.
I think you still have to narrow it from 3 to 2. And the next open window, we'll look at the schedule coming up, but the next open window is Tuesday. And that's when we'll get more information, probably, maybe before that. We'll see. But in regards to being a head coach, and this is what Hugh Freeze asked for, you got to make tough decisions. And at some point, these reps are going to get more and more valuable as we get closer and closer to the season. Because having 3 quarterbacks, while it's nice for depth, it doesn't always necessarily help you win football games. And so you need to really develop the 2 guys that you think are going to be first and second team. And, give some love to the third string guy because you never know what's going to happen. And also you need to develop a program and develop guys for the future if you feel like he's going to be here. But I think you got to make the decision, Darrell. I think it doesn't matter which 2 it is. If you think Payton left, nothing to be desired in the scrimmage, and that's concerning. If you think the 2 are Robby, Ashford, and Holden Geriner, I think you need to make that decision and cut it from 3 to 2. Will we? I don't know. Are we owed that information? No, we're not. But our job is to speculate on what we think is going to happen. And I do think he will narrow it from 3 to 2, Darrell. It may just not be the exact 2 that we thought it would be.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and state the obvious. I'm going to, you talk about it's our job to analyze it. I'm going to just be transparent and say that the longer he leaves it open with 3 dudes and doesn't pare it down to 2, in my mind, that tells me that Holden Geriner, I mean, why else do you leave the competition open and leave 3 dudes in it unless Holden Geriner has a chance to win the job?
Or the other side of the coin is Payton hasn't grabbed it. And you got to think Payton's been given the opportunity to grab and seize the job. And it just doesn't sound like he's been there every step of the way. I still think he's going to end up getting it. But based on what we heard yesterday, I don't know. I think it's a little cause for concern.
This could be also, again, we're not in the mind of a head coach or knowing sometimes they play these little games or they have these little motivation tactics to get people to separate themselves.
Yeah.
Hugh Freeze may know or may feel strongly about who the quarterback's going to be and use these type of situations to get that guy to get motivated a little bit to get that separation, just to not let him get too comfortable and feel like the job is his and take it for granted. Work a little harder. He could be using this to strategize and say, okay, I want to push him a little bit, so I'm going to leave this job open, or I'm going to make this statement that I got to go back to film, and then that person that needs to get separation or hasn't grabbed it by the horns does that on Monday and Tuesday because of that little push. Who knows? Coaches play head games all the time, and they use the the good ones do anyway, to use the media to get that across.
All right, Brian Battie, boy, he could be a star based on what we heard from Saturday. We discussed that and more next, coming up on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And boy, I mean, Auburn fans should know better than anybody the impact of hiring the right guy after maybe hiring the wrong guy. It can be very costly. It can be very, very devastating to your business. It really just sets you back. And obviously I'm talking about football here, but I mean, it's like this in every type of business, especially a small business. So LinkedIn Jobs, they help you find the qualified candidates that you actually want to talk to faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Darrell Dapprich, our guest on today's Locked On Auburn, every single Sunday throughout the season. Darrell and I will be here every Sunday morning to recap what happened the day or evening before. Brian Battie, sounds like he was incredible, impossible to tackle, was so good at it sounds like he has a knack, Darrell, of getting outside the tackles and then just kind of making situations tough for Auburn's defensive backs in yesterday's scrimmage. 20-yard run, he'd bust another run. I mean, it sounds like he was all over the place yesterday.
We've talked about how Auburn's running back room is the top 2 position group right there on this roster. And even with Jarquez Hunter missing some time in practice and all the speculation with that, it's why I've said Brian Battie can be a feature back. He can. He did it at South Florida. We're not talking about having to go too far down the pecking order to get a guy to become the feature back that has experience, has explosiveness. I have read numerous preseason scouting reports, magazines, articles that said he was one of the best transfer portal gets in the country. And this is a guy that came in to presumably be a backup, and he's one of the best gets in the country. I think that people are going to really, really be surprised and enjoy the production, regardless with how many games, regardless with Hunter being running back number 1. Battie's going to get his touches, and he's going to do some damage. And he's not – I felt like he was going to be like a specialty back, right? He was going to do certain things. He can be a guy that carries the rock for you 15 times a game. He can. He's done it before. He could do it again if need be. Now, you don't want him to do that. You'd prefer him get 10 carries a game and catch some passes out of the backfield. He's electric with swing passes and screen passes and that kind of thing. But he can be. He can be. And then after that, Damari Alston looked good. And you've got Cobb that's good. So the running back room is in great hands. And the only reason why I was concerned Zach, was we had heard some injury issues with him, right? That he was nursing. Looks like and sounds like he came back from those with a vengeance, and that is a huge positive outlook for Auburn.
Yeah, it sounds like the entire running back room was impressive yesterday. Damari Alston had one source said it was a 50-yard run. Another one said it was like a 65-yard run. Regardless, it was from a long way away, and he busted a big one, and that was certainly part of it. Jarquez Hunter sounds like he had a good run up the middle. That was really one of the few runs that was up the middle. All the other explosive runs were on the outside, is what it sounds like, which is probably another concern that we should talk about down the road as far as, is Auburn's run defense actually okay? I think that's something that we need to talk about down the road, but we'll focus on more of the positive stuff today. Jyaire Shorter, heard good things about Jyaire Shorter at wide receiver. Sounds like Shane Hooks made some big plays at wide receiver as well. So those are, two of the guys that we were expecting to hear more of throughout fall camp, and that's exactly what happened in the first scrimmage, Darrell.
Yeah, I don't want to hit the panic button. We talked about this after A-Day. Because of the wet footing, we didn't think that the edge guys and the linebackers and the safety were doing a good job of holding the edge, because Auburn's backs had a field day at A-Day bouncing stuff outside. I mean, whether it was Hunter or Alston or Battie, they just absolutely got outside, and that's where most of the yards were gained. Well, I was a little bit concerned then that Auburn wasn't setting the edge defensively. And we heard things like, well, wet conditions, if that's still happening through scrimmages and that kind of thing, that's got to get shored up. And they've got to put people at jack, at edge, at safety that can hold the edge. Because otherwise, SEC backs have the ability to bounce it outside. And I would be, at that point, a little bit concerned with Auburn's run defense. Very, very excited to hear about some of the reports coming out with receivers, guys like Hooks with yards after the catch. Supposedly caught a slant at about 6 yards and turned it into a 30-yard gain. I love that. I love the slant game. That's one thing Auburn hasn't done. We were screaming for years, use the middle of the field, use some slants, especially down inside the 10. If Hooks and Shorter and guys like that can catch balls 6-7 yards in on a slant pattern and get 15 to 20 after the catch, I love it. It's going to be a tremendous attribute to Auburn's offense. So, yeah, I also heard there were some pretty stinking big holes that the offensive line was opening up as well. I don't know about – I think you would have a little bit more insight because you asked the question of Hugh Freeze of rush, pass rush. I mean, I don't know if Auburn was getting push and was getting any kind of rush. I know that's a concern as well. Yeah, for sure. And Hugh Freeze said some interesting things when I asked that question. We'll touch on in a second. As far as like other winners today, Elijah McAllister sounds like he had a really, really good scrimmage. He got a few sacks. He got a pass breakup. I think he had a few tackles for loss. So Elijah McAllister is a guy that stepped up in a big way yesterday. I certainly loved that. It also sounds like Lawrence Johnson had a pretty big day yesterday, which is a name that we haven't really talked about a ton other than he's in that first rotation after the starters come in on the defensive line. But yeah, props to Lawrence Johnson. Sounds like he had one or two really big tackles for a loss yesterday. Got a lot of snaps on a defensive line at Purdue playing big boy football in the Big Ten. Yep. So, these are guys that when you get all excited about them when they become transfers, I know I did in the transfer portal, you can't forget about them once you hear their name, maybe number 2 on the depth chart. The excitement doesn't need to fade away and go. This is a guy that can emerge and really kind of force his will. He played, again, at Purdue in the Big Ten against great competition. He could eat up space and help. And we need to remember that. Just as excited as we were when we got him in the portal, he's a contributor. Right. I asked Hugh Freeze 2 questions, Darrell, in his press conference where he spent a little bit of time with us afterwards. I want to touch on both of those questions and his answers, get your thoughts on what he said in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. I want to encourage you to join the Locked On Auburn Discord. It is free. All you have to do is click the link in the episode description down below. Darrell, I asked, like you said, about the pass rush, and I was expecting him to kind of highlight a specific player or say, hey, it needs to get better or get worse. But his answer was very quick. He said, Jalen McLeod and Steven Sings are 2 of the best pass rushers. So we are so much better now than we were after the spring because we added those 2 guys. But then he added the note, Darrell, that we're going to see in third down packages and pass rush packages, both of those guys on the field, which I'm like, I don't know why you're telling us that, but
That's good info. So that's going to be something that we might see in the coming weeks and in third and long situations, seeing both of those guys on the field at the same time.
It's so encouraging because we kind of felt that way with McLeod. When you got him from App State, he came in very hyped, very physical specimen, had great game against Texas A&M. Steven Sings was a little bit under the radar. We mentioned him.
Didn't he sit in the portal for a long time?
He did sit in the portal for a long time. And you were talking about possible edge guys. Remember, we ranked them. We ranked guys that we wanted to see. And this is a kid from Liberty that was coached before. He's familiar with Garrett, and so they knew his skill set. But if you go back and look at his stats at Liberty, they were pretty good. I mean, he had some tackles for loss. He had some sacks. He had the body type. I think he's only a sophomore, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that there's some potential there. The fact that he's come in and it's translated to this level in a scrimmage and in fall camp, think of the depth now that you have at that position, which was a major area of concern coming out of the spring, just like Hugh Freeze said. And now you've shorted up with McLeod and Sings because you had McAllister, I believe, in the spring. I think you did. I think he'd already popped.
You did. Yeah. He came in December. Yep.
So McLeod and Sings were guys that were added later. These are dudes that are later additions, and they're being talked about and singled out at a press conference. I think that's good, and I think that speaks volume about where that room is right now.
Yeah, Auburn has Sings listed as a junior, but he could be a redshirt sophomore. Who knows? So all that stuff is so weird, the way they class that. But he's got a few years left, which is encouraging. It's not a guy that has to pop this year. But number 18 on the edge looks a little funny, but I'm all for it. It's going to take some getting used to seeing a number 18 rushing the passer. It's kind of funny. The other question I asked Hugh Freeze was about linebacker. We heard Coach Roberts last week kind of say, yeah, there's a lot of dudes, but nobody's really separated themselves yet. And so I asked Coach Freeze, I'm like, who stood out at linebacker? Any separation there? And he said Larry Nixon III, which is probably a good thing because he's the most experienced linebacker in the room, but we hadn't really seen him next to Austin Keys as much as we expected to. But now after this first scrimmage, is starting to get a little bit more real. And so maybe it's starting to click. Maybe he's starting to get more comfortable in what this defense is supposed to look like. Because he spent so much time at North Texas and he's got to re-up his life and then come over here. So I thought that was a good thing. I thought it was good to hear a little bit about Larry Nixon III.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that he was going to be an immediate contributor when we got him in the portal.
He's got to be. I mean, it's his last year of eligibility. He's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that I think that I'd pencil in as a starter along with Keys. Now I'm hearing Asante is ascending. Say that real fast 3 times. I think he's really coming
Ascending
on.
Ascending
Asante. But Nixon is a guy that when Auburn got him in the transfer, I was like, oh, there he is, plug and play. He's a starter. Go look at his film. He's a tackling machine. He goes to the football very, very well. He breaks down. He doesn't have a lot of missed tackles. He's really good in space. So I'm not surprised. And maybe it just took him a little bit of time to catch on, to get comfortable, to get acclimated. But I'm very excited about him and thought that he was going to be counted on. Or after game 2, I predicted in one of your – we were talking about all these linebackers were going to play a lot against UMass, and then we're going to have to start paring it down at one point. I felt like by game 2 or 3, Nixon would be your starter, would be one of your starters.
Who are the 2 starters against UMass?
Keys and Nixon is who – against UMass, Keys and Asante is who I think will trot out there.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And then I think Cam Riley and Nixon get a lot of snaps as well.
I think Cam Riley got a sack yesterday. I think he sacked Robby, maybe. I'm not sure, but he got a sack, which I thought was good because he wasn't really used to rush the passer at all. Yeah. Freeze did give some updates on injuries, which I never know when you're allowed to talk about that stuff or not. So I'm glad that he said this. So we're just quoting him. Steiner has a hamstring issue. Coy Moore's been battling an ankle issue. Camden Brown, he just said it was bad luck. So it sounds like a lot of different things, possibly some nagging things. Javarius Johnson, he talked about having stitches in his mouth. There was something that happened at practice where he had to get stitches in his mouth and it's just uncomfortable. Malcolm Johnson Jr. has been battling a shoulder injury. And then Austin Keys has been battling a shoulder injury. So take that for what it's worth. As far as what's coming up in Auburn's fall camp, they are off today. They're off on Sunday. On Monday, they will have practice And all we will get from media purposes is player interviews after practice. And then on Tuesday is when we get our next viewing window. And then we'll talk to the offensive assistant coaches after that. And then Wednesday, Darrell, is first day of classes at Auburn. So there will be no practice, no media, just kind of focusing on first day of class. And then on Thursday, we get Coach Freeze as at a presser. And I bet we get some quarterback news there. Just a hunch, just a guess. And we'll also get a viewing window that evening. So that's kind of what we're looking at over the next few days of fall camp, Darrell.
Exciting time. Interesting. I think the takeaway from all of this is something you touched on earlier in the podcast, and that was, will Hugh Freeze pare this down from 3 to 2 by Monday? He said he was going to look at film. Tuesday, when will that happen? How soon will he go from 3 to 2, and who will it be? That is the most intriguing storyline coming out of fall camp early next week, I think.
I think you're right. We'll cover it every step of the way, every single day at Locked On Auburn. Click that subscribe button, like the video, helps us out a ton. Darrell, how can people support you, brother?
Follow me on Twitter, DAP6410. If you click that link down there for the Discord, we will interact in the Discord, the Locked On Auburn Discord. Love it. Love having the opportunity to communicate with some of the listeners and viewers.
Yeah. Follow me on socials at @Blackerby. Read all of our written work at auburndaily.com. Until tomorrow, we'll see you. This has been Locked On Auburn.